So Critical Role's Candela Obscura is here, and whilst many are asking, how does it work, and is it good? I want to ask, what's the point? Up front, I want to say that I actually think the show is good, or at least the pilot episode was good. Matt is a good GM, the cast are all good. We know that they know how to run these games now. It's unsurprising that the show is good. They know how to make this now. I haven't seen anything on the Critical channel that's particularly seemed bad. Even their one-shots or the little side quests, it's all pretty much worked. Though for the record, Mush's Honey Heist is a definite watch. It is an absolute highlight. That's so good. The Honey Heist ones are so good. But I'm more curious as to why they've done this. On a cynical level, I get why. You want to cash in. You have a guaranteed audience. You're making a show. You might as well own the thing that you are making. It's a good idea to make money off of your audience. Why benefit the designers of other games when you can simply cash in on the audience that you already have? I did mention that I was being cynical, right? But yeah, from a desire to make money perspective, it makes sense to create a game. But did they do it for any other reason is what I'm curious about. Did they have a particular passion to make this game? Did they have something that they wanted to say? So I'm going to look at it from the perspective of how I choose games. Now, I play a lot of RPGs, and when I pick a new one, it's usually for one or two very specific reasons. But I have a breadth of, not knowledge necessarily, but definitely experience. So what do I look for in a game, and does Candela Obscura meet any of that criteria? Number one, setting and lore. This is both the most and least important one for me. I homebrew. I'm a writer. I want to write things, so I will generally ignore a game's lore entirely. I am almost completely unfamiliar with the D&D lore. I know the Tal'Dorei lore because I've been watching Critical Role, and I have the Tal'Dorei book, and I have actually read it, but at a certain point during my Tal'Dorei campaign, I said to people, hey, why don't we treat Critical Role as that's the story of what happened? That's the generally known story to the world of Alexandria of what happened during the Vox Machina campaign. Not necessarily true or accurate in certain places, but that allowed me to play with the world in a way that I needed. I could manipulate the events, the setting, and indeed the characters, including the characters of Vox Machina who have appeared in my campaign, so that they could facilitate what I needed them to do. And my players had largely seen all of Campaign 1, so it allowed me to say that they were allowed to take their meta-knowledge and put it into the game. They knew the story of Vox Machina in the context of the game, it just wasn't necessarily accurate. So whilst the lore of Candela Obscura looks quite well written and is quite interesting, it doesn't matter to me because I'm going to completely rewrite it anyway. I'm going to have an idea of how I want the world to work, and I'm just going to change or drop or ignore whatever it is that doesn't fit what I want it to do, and then I'm going to write the sections that do what I want them to do. For example, and a fairly common one that's spoken about online, I almost immediately have dropped any sense of evil races in D&D because it's just nonsense. It's just very bad storytelling. It's just structurally silly. People have gone into more depth into why it's bad, but I'm just going to tell you that from a storytelling perspective, it's dumb to have species be inherently evil. Anyway, that's really not what this video is about. I don't know why I'm going off on a tangent there. So lore, very pretty, very nice, but I don't really need it. A setting, however, can draw me in. The Root RPG, for example, I'm a big fan of the Root board game, and so that anthropomorphic animal forest war setting is very interesting to me. I think that's something worth exploring. Similarly, in a sci-fi game like Traveller or Rifts, I'm interested in seeing some more sci-fi elements, space travel, aliens. That's an interesting idea to me as opposed to the traditional fantasy setting. This was all feeding into why I love Fate so much, because it's so open. It can be whatever you want it to be. Do you want to play a sci-fi western? Well, you can do that in Fate. Do you want to play a under the seas fantastical adventure like The Little Mermaid? Then yes, you can do that in Fate. It's loose. This is what appeals to me because I'm a writer, although I understand that that would not appeal to everybody. But back to Candela Obscura, it doesn't really do anything for me. When you boil out the lore and everything else, it's a human world with light magic elements. Whoop-de-doo. There's nothing about the setting of Candela Obscura that really draws me in. I don't dislike it. It seems perfectly fine as a soft magic fantasy horror genre, but I've seen that before elsewhere. It doesn't seem to be adding anything new or interesting to the genre in that regard. But if you're primarily a D&D player, I imagine this does look like something new and interesting to you. Like I say, it's not to me because I've played a massive breadth of games, but hey, If you're curious to play this setting, then great. Number 2, character classes. Not every game has character classes, but every game will have characters who specialise. Characters should be relatively unique. The players should feel like they're doing something that the other players aren't doing. And from a purely mechanical sense, Candela Obscura does seem to manage this. It does seem to have a fairly unique feeling to each of the characters. But they're just not that interesting. This is partly because the setting, as I said, is generic human with light magic, and that's just not a lot happening there. I can often pitch a game to people as, do you want to play as such and such? Do you want to play as a vampire? Do you want to play as a squirrel? Do you want to play as a Cthulhian monster? Do you want to play as Iron Man? I can pitch that, but for Candela Obscura, it's just, do you want to play as a journalist and a criminal, and just these sort of mundane elements. Now, again, this isn't bad, it's just not that interesting. Functional in its own way, fits the setting, fits the world, and it looks interesting enough. The characters within the mechanics of them, which we'll get to in a bit, look like they work quite well and fit the world, but I can't pitch those. It's not bad, I just can't see myself enthusiastically telling somebody they could play a professor of philosophy when they could be playing a sign language wizard or a cybernetic space pirate or the Golden Girls fighting Cthulhu. It's just easier to pitch those ideas than it is this relatively mundane one. So I'm not sure how to pitch the setting, I'm not sure how to pitch the characters. Again, this is coming from a perspective of somebody who's played a lot of games. If you are very narrowly in the D&D camp, then this will seem like something new to you, which is great. This is purely aesthetic. This is not the only elements of a game. And again, like I say, it seems like it works fine, it's just I can get it elsewhere. So let's look at the nitty-gritty. Number 3, character creation. Now, I love character creation. The only reason I bought the Traveller game is because I'd heard about the character creation process and I absolutely was obsessed with it. If you don't know in character creation, you choose a starting point for your character and then you roll their life events in order to figure out how their life has gone and where they've ended up at the start of the campaign. And it's unlikely, but it's very possible to actually die during character creation. If you push your character too far and things go too wrong, you can die during character creation. That is madness, and I just had to play the game. Similarly, I love the character creation from Vampire the Masquerade. I love Fate, obviously, because it's open and storytelling. Just a good character creation process can really draw me in. And again, I feel like Candela Obscura falls a little short on this for me. You pick your character archetype, and then you basically get a pre-made character sheet that explains how you start. Now, there's a lot of options and choices you can make on that, and there's powers and abilities and equipment and all these things on there that do modify your character, but it's a curious setup to have it that fixed. I get why it's a stripped down version of a game rather than have to constantly look through the book to see what your archetype can do. It's just on the page for you there. That's actually a pretty good idea. And again, it looks kind of interesting, but it's not wild. There's not a lot of unique elements. It just is what it is, and you pick a couple of powers that you maybe don't fully understand, and then you're good to go. It's too easy almost. I kind of like a complex character creation process, like a character creation that takes an entire session, a la Fate or Traveller. I just kind of like that. I like that. Again, that's something I can pitch to people. Come play this game. You can create a character through these means, through this fun method. But this, I think, is part of Candela Obscura's appeal as a more one-shot episodic game. You can grab one of these character sheets and be ready to go, which actually is really good. If I was planning a one-shot, this is a good system to do it. This is a good way, a good method of character creation for me to just put down on the table and say, here, make your choices, we're good to go. I actually quite like that in that regard, but not for a longer campaign, which I guess the game isn't entirely designed for, but it probably should be. I don't know. It's a weird hybrid. I know they've said that they want the game to be more designed for singular adventures. So again, character creation isn't drawing me in. I've yet to really spot why they've made this game. But I think we're getting to a crux of what the game's really about with the next thing, which is number 4, mechanics. I love Fate, and Fate has relatively unique mechanics in the sense that it is incredibly narrative driven, to the point that I've not really seen any other game do. You can drive your actions through the narrative by purposefully doing things that complement your skills. The GM doesn't ask you for a stealth check or whatever. You look at what skills you are best at, and then you tailor your response to fit those skills so that you are rolling the best possible outcome. And mechanics can be a big pitch. Again, I mentioned Inspirals, learning sign language through the course of the game. I can pitch that. Alice is Missing, absolutely love. Game played in silence via text and other elements as well. Games don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, of course. They don't have to have a entirely unique set of mechanics to work. I'm not demanding that of anybody. I'm just saying that I need something to get me in, and mechanics can be a way. Alice is Missing absolutely caught me on the mechanics. As soon as I saw that the Shut Up and Sit Down video where they were talking about how it was played, I was like, well, I've got to play that. It just sounds so interesting. Candela Obscura is fine, I guess. It operates on a d6 system where essentially you are tailoring the scene to try and roll as many dice as possible in the hopes that one of them succeeds. The more dice you roll, the more likely you are to roll a success. And that's not bad. I haven't precisely seen that set up before. Wanted to chuck more dice is a little different than rolling dice and adding modifiers, which is what most systems do. But is it interesting enough for me to pitch to players? No, I don't think it is. It's a very narrative game, so you would think that it would appeal to me if it's mechanics light, but it still needs something. Now, this could partly be the way that they played it on the show, but it has the more of the D&D mindset of the GM asking the players to do things, which is the opposite of narrative to me. I'd rather have the players dictating how the scene goes and explaining how they want to do it, rather than have the GM simply every now and then ask for a specific role. And that is definitely a more D&D mindset, which they probably do have, and I have D&D players that I've run Fate for who, again, take a while to get to understand the system because they're in that mindset. This does, however, seem to be where the most work has gone. Sure, they put a lot of work into the lore, but really they've tried to craft some interesting and relatively unique feeling mechanics. But they've gone a little bit too, what's the word, mechanical with the mechanics? Is that a weird phrase? What I'm trying to say is that there's no real flair. They've just worked out a series of systems to do things. They've worked out if you do this, you can do this, and this can trigger this, and this can trigger this. It's very board gamey, which is fine. I love board games. I collect board games. But it's not what I'm looking for in my role-playing game. I'm looking for something that is a little bit more fluid. But they do seem to have a series of mechanics that work quite well together, and I would be curious to play and see how it works. And I like the set of unique abilities that you would have chosen for character creation that will modify the way you play. So it looks very functional, and I would say that's where they seem to have put their efforts in to make a functional game, make a mechanically sound game rather than a mechanically interesting game. And I think comes from a slightly more D&D mindset. D&D is a very mechanically functional game. It's a miniatures war game in a lot of ways, which is, again, okay, but not necessarily what I'm looking for at any time, and not the easiest thing to pitch. But it makes sense for them. It makes sense that they would do that because that's their audience. Their audience are D&D players, mostly, or people that they've gotten into D&D in some way. So it makes sense that they would have a very clear mechanical way of working their game. And it sounds like it works pretty well. It sounds like a fairly solid system. It's just, again, not that interesting. I'm not sure how I would pitch it if I was trying to convince people to play the game. It's a series of rules that I would have to explain rather than a couple of rules that I could get excited about. I get excited about telling somebody that we're going to learn sign language in its Inspirals, or that there's going to be a fluid system of narrative in Fate, or I can even get excited about telling people that you might end up in medical debt in Traveller, as the economy is a very micromanaged element of that game, but in a way that's interesting rather than just sort of in the way. It's integral. But I'm not sure what I would get excited about in Candela Obscura. It's just very functional. The last thing that can get me is number 5, the hook. This is probably Candela Obscura's strongest part because its hook is Critical Role. Precisely how hands-on they actually have been with the creation of this game, I'm a little unclear on, but they definitely have had some influence, or at the very least they've probably had their say here and there. They created a game that they wanted to play, presumably a game that they knew they could turn into a decent show. And that's a hook. It's Matt Mercer approved, and Matt Mercer's a really good GM, so cool, maybe that's enough. I'm all for them promoting their D&D audience to branch out and try other games. There are thousands of games out there, some of them, I would say most of them, better than D&D. Not clear why they had to create their own game instead of promoting something that already existed, other than to make money. But sure, it's a good hook. Here's a game that Critical Role thinks you should be playing. There's a good chance their audience will. But outside of its association with Critical Role, what's the hook? Thematically, it just sort of feels like Call of Cthulhu, but with less horror. Sure, okay, but what's the point of that? If I was coming at it outside of the Critical Role fandom to try and play a new game, and I look at this, what's the hook? What gets me in? What makes me want to play this game? And honestly, I sort of don't care about this game. Like I said, the show looks good and the game looks very functional, so maybe I would give it a try if someone was offering it, but it's not drawing me in, it's not grabbing me in any way. The hook is kind of an encompassing thing, so it could be part of the setting or the lore, it could be about the opportunity to play a character type that you've never seen before, an element of character creation that's quite unique, something just within the mechanics that's unique and interesting. It could be any number of those things, but I feel like a game often needs one, and I'm not sure what Candela Obscura is offering. I'm just unclear what its hook is, what it's trying to sell me, other than the branding. Now, this might be my most cynical video yet, and I apologise for that. It's probably a good game. I mean, I'm sure it's a perfectly fine game. It doesn't look bad by any stretch of the imagination, and the show is good. Like I say, they know how to make these shows now. The show is good. Give it a watch. But I'm just not sure why they bothered to make this game. I'm just trying to figure out why they bothered to make this game instead of promoting another game or working in a system that's more interesting, something different, something they could really promote the mechanics of, something they could do that's unique. This doesn't feel that unique. I'm trying to be charitable here and say that they're doing this for some reason other than a cash grab, but I can't figure out what it is. I can't see the passion for this game. I can't see what the reason for making this game and the reason for me playing this game would be. I'd love for them to have made a game with a big hook, some big, massive change, something really interesting. They really could have as well. They really could have gone all out. But this is just they're sitting around play acting and rolling some dice, which I know is the genre. It's what the hobby is. But you can have something. You could have I don't know. They just I'm not a game designer, so I don't know what it would have been. But I've played a lot of games, and you really could have something interesting. You could have them playing, a sign language based game or a game that has a collaborative story element that they can sort of pass around, or even if they played like Paranoia where things are completely wacky and over the top and like the people are being killed off all the time. Just something I don't know. There's just not enough to Candela Obscura for me to think that it is worth their time to have made it. But it seems fine. Like I say, it seems very competent is the word I keep using. It just doesn't strike me as particularly special. But if you've only really played D&D, then it's an alternative option. It might draw somebody into the larger hobby. Check out any of the other games that are out there. There's hundreds and thousands of them, and they're great. Not all of them are great, but some of them are great. But yes, if it gets you into the larger hobby, then fantastic. If you found D&D through Critical Role and it's your only real experience, and this gets you into the larger hobby, fantastic. I'm all for that. But yeah, I don't see myself playing it. I don't see the need for it. I would rather play Brindlewood Bay again if I want a little like low key horror, or Call of Cthulhu, which I woefully lack of play of Call of Cthulhu. I think I played it maybe once a long, long time ago, and that's bizarre because I love Cthulhu. It's a weird way. You're not supposed to love Cthulhu. That's bad. Yeah, that's me. That's my curmudgeonly take on the situation. So there we are. Bitch at me in the comments for being a hater, like a little greasy little neckbeard that I am. Again, I'm sure the game is fine. It looks fine. The show is good. Go watch the show, or the pilot episode is good at least. Maybe I'm missing something. Tell me in the comments if I'm missing something about the game. If there's something about this game that's really like intrigued you, makes you really want to play it, then let me know. I'd be curious to see how people with less experience of playing RPGs, people who've maybe only played D&D, kind of view it. Maybe it's intriguing them. Maybe it's hitting all the right kind of buttons for them. So I'd be very interested to hear about that. Tell me to stop being so negative all the time if you like people to do that every now and then. I'm a little bit of a negative person. I try and get videos out every weekend, but I'm not great at it, but I do my best. Yeah, please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, if you found this interesting, as to what I look for in games, what kind of draws me into games. Find me on social medias. There's links below. We have an Amazon wishlist and a Ko-fi. I keep saying this wrong. I always want to say Ko-fi, but it's Ko-fi. Support page. I'm working on a live event, a mega game event at the moment, so keep an eye out for information on that. I'll make a video on it when the tickets are on sale. That'll be happening in August in London, so you can come play a game with me, play a mega game with me. Thank you for watching and getting all the way to the end here, and I appreciate all your support, and that's all for now. The end.